Hello and welcome to the Connection podcast series. I'm delighted to welcome Dave Stotler. Dave is the VP and General Manager of VortX. And today we're going to be looking at a getting technical session, specifically revolving around the use of starch in the modern corrugated box plant. So, Dave, I'd like to sort of start off the session by looking at some of the issues that the industry is facing, particularly as we're all looking at sustainability. We're looking to reduce waste in the corrugated board making process, and we're also looking at cost savings. So, obviously, the big move at the moment in Europe, Middle East, and starting to come to the States in a big way is obviously lighter weight papers, finer flutes, and obviously recycled liners. So, Dave, tell us why starch mixing is so important.
Well, with the advent of lighter board and more flutes, it has increased the demand on the starch kitchens in terms of the quantity of adhesive that's required. More flutes require more adhesive. Basically, with that in mind, we looked at the future and said, this is what's potentially going to occur, and developed equipment to accommodate the increased demands.
And Dave, it's quite interesting because, when you look at, a lot of box plants around the world, that they've got the big line item numbers with, the full line corrugators. Why do you think it is that the starch kitchen tends to be right at the bottom of the list? Why is it always the last thing that's looked at?
I think initially it was that it wasn't the bottleneck. It wasn't the thing that was prohibiting speed. It wasn't the item that they couldn't augment by having additional chemicals and additional costs. And so it was overlooked, so to speak. Now it's the bottleneck. In other words, we're getting wider machines, we're getting faster machines, and to get those speeds, and that it now has an importance in terms of what are the costs of the adhesive.
And so you mentioned there, obviously corrugators getting wider, they're getting faster. So I mean, let's start looking at the actual the whole starch production process. I mean, do you feel that there's still an element of education that needs to be given to some of these box plants as they step up from the narrower corrugators, the more traditional corrugators, moving to these high volume, high speed machines?
Yes, I really do. I think that we're seeing a process of, we're trying to take it from an art, so to speak, into a science. And the education is occurring by using SPC programs to identify improvement areas. And that's what we're seeing, the proliferation of the starch kitchen, and then the use of additional components and so forth to improve the numbers coming off the corrugator.
And have there been any sort of specific findings from your side in terms of when people are transitioning from kraft liners onto recycled liners? Surely there has to be some modifications in the actual starch recipe itself.
Most definitely. And we're also seeing different starches being used, from wheat starch, pea starch, tapioca. So it's worldwide. It really, starch is just simply a mechanism or a polymer to combine the boards. Basically, what we're seeing is what are the economics in that particular region or area. And we're seeing different starches used. We're also seeing that the different papers are creating other opportunities in terms of what can we do to improve those numbers.
And obviously, in that part of the conversation, Dave, we could be looking at additives. There's an awful lot of development taking place with some of the specialty chemical companies. Talk us through what's been going on in that part of the process.
I'd like to be able to be full disclosure to you, but unfortunately I can't at this time, because we are working with a number of companies that are developing some very exciting things that may reshape the corrugating industry very, very shortly. But I will tell you that yes, there are things that can be done to the base formula using additives and so forth that will improve the thermal characteristics of the starch. It may improve the permeability of the starch, or how it dives into the paper and attaches itself. There's a number of things that the starch companies are developing, and it's almost like they've taken the blinders off and said, hey, we have all these options that we can look at, and let's develop the products that will satisfy the future. And that, for example, fine flute, E-flute, and things like that, trying to run that very fast presents separate opportunities for them. And the economics change then when you start to run those kind of special papers and special flute profiles.
And when we start talking about the modern corrugated box plant, where they might be running 10 or 12 grade changes per day. Obviously, the actual setup of the modern starch kitchen, I mean, has to be tied in with the estimating and the scheduling systems, etc. So, what work are you doing with the actual OEMs and the software providers themselves to ensure that data transfer is there?
Well, certainly the flexibility of the machinery is paramount to being able to put the right chemistry on the machine at the time they need it. For example, they are increasing the number of grade changes, and the scheduling systems are based on an algorithm that may have width versus waterproof versus different flute profiles. So the randomness of the scheduling has increased to get the best economics, simply put.
And when we're also talking about the fine flutes, and we're looking at the really ultra lightweight recycled papers, particularly that we're tending to see being used in Europe at the moment. I was interested in reading about your latest development, the F3, which is your Tornado product. Tell us a little bit about some of the background changes that have taken place in your systems over the last 18 months or so.
I think one of the largest things that we've seen occurring is basically two things. We've gotten much higher volumes, but we've also increased the flexibility or the delivery systems out at the corrugator. And we're now seeing just about almost every modern corrugator that we've been working with, the use of use tanks or run tanks at the corrugator. Now that does two things for them. That gives them the ability to control the thermal characteristics of the adhesive, which equates to application, but it also gives us the ability to put specialty chemicals or products in at the corrugator on demand with a short amount of time, so that it doesn't lock down the scheduling system, so to speak.
And the latest generation, the F3 Tornado, how many have you got in and running right now, Dave?
Roughly 300.
Okay. And the general feedback in terms of Are you able to sort of put a figure on it in terms of, what's the return on investment for a box plant?
Well, I'd love to tell you that they're 9 months or less, but I think the industry standard that we're seeing is can we get a payback within about a 16 to 18 month period? And we've been very successful in doing that.
And Dave, just to sort of finish off, I mean, if we were to look into the crystal ball, let's look to the future. What can the industry expect to see coming over the next 12, 24, 36 months?
Well, I think that the specialty chemical groups are going to develop some interesting things in the very near future. And that may change the overall view of starch. But more importantly, do they have the equipment in place to allow for those kind of items to occur? In other words, how do I deliver this out at the corrugator on a real-time basis for whatever they're running? Because if it's a standard brown box and there's nothing that's special about the performance liners or anything like that, the economics aren't there to put all these chemicals in there. But if they need them and they can run these, in other words, what we look at is should they be using those? Some people say, hey, I'll just use it for everything, but the economics aren't there. What we're trying to do is develop equipment that will give them that flexibility to turn it on and off whenever they need to and keep those economics. So they're turning, the starch people are turning the thing from an art to more of a science, and that's what we have to position ourselves to do.
And just thinking about the additives and the chemicals that are being put into the starch right now, I mean, obviously, is it safe to say that will not have any impact on the recyclability of the finished box?
That's being considered as the chemicals are being developed. They're making sure that the recyclability of the components will be there also.
Well, Dave, thank you so much indeed. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. Obviously, as we said at the beginning, sustainability, the recyclability of the board is so important. And of course, as corrugators get wider and faster, lighter weight papers, finer flutes, the actual mixing of the starch has probably never been more important than it is today. So, Dave Stotler, thank you ever so much indeed. Wonderful having you with us.
My pleasure, and thank you very much.